Hello, everyone. Welcome to the relationship series. You all know me. I'm Dene, and basically, this series, or why I started this series, was um to navigate what the Bible has to say about godly relationships and forming healthy relationships with the people around us, because the Bible has a lot of wisdom to offer as it relates to that. And I believe if we listen more, or we can learn a lot from what the Bible has to say. And I won't be long, so I'll just get right into it. So, the topic for this lesson is storge love, and I said it before that the Greeks had four different words for love, storge being familiar love, so that's what we'll discuss today. And the story of interest, or one of the stories of interest, is the story of Ruth, which comes to us from the book of Ruth, which is her namesake. And I'll just give you the background right now. So Ruth was a Moabitess woman. And how this whole story basically started is that Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, they left their home country and sojourned to Moab because there was a famine in their own land. And they basically settled in Moab. But it wasn't long after settling in Moab that Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. You can just imagine how distraught she was, how she must have felt to know that her husband just died like that, leaving her and her two sons. But at least she still had her two sons, right? Well, Mahlon and Chilion, they took wives for themselves, namely Ruth and Orpah, respectively. And not 10 years down the line, that Mahlon and Chilion also died, leaving all three women alone without a male head. So this was a problem because if you're a woman in society at this time, you basically need to be under the care and protection of a man so that you wouldn't be taken advantage of. And the best interests are in their best interests, seeing that they were all widows, they would have to like remarry or find some kinsman of theirs in order to be under their guide and their protection, and so that they could have some sort of thing for themselves so that they'll be able to take care of themselves. But in the case of Naomi, she was now old and she was grief stricken. She wasn't in a position to marry or to remarry. All she had to do was to like go home, back to her kinsman, back to her country, and hope that she can find a place there. But as for the other two, Arpa and Ruth, they would be able to remarry. They were under no strict laws, say like the Jewish women, because Naomi was a Jew. But they were Moabite women, so they weren't under any of those laws. So they'd be able to remarry quickly, easily. And seeing that they were recently widowed and that they were childless, because no children was mentioned, that means they shouldn't have much issue. And so Naomi basically told them that they have prospects, they have opportunities, and that she wasn't going to hold them back. She wanted them to go search, seek, and find some way so that they could survive. And because she didn't have anything left to give them, she didn't have anything to offer them. She said, "Are there any more sons in my womb that you may be able to marry?" She knew that she was just probably a frail old lady, and really all she had was herself, and these women didn't really need to be around her. But Arpa, you could tell that the relationship with Arpa and Naomi was good because she said her tearful goodbye. She was sad to see Naomi go, and Naomi said that she would be going back to her homeland. But at the same time, she was like, "There's nothing left for me here. I'm going to go. I'm going to leave." And so she left. But Ruth was different. Ruth clung to Naomi. And that brings us to our very first lesson from this book, sticking together in hard times. So yes, our first lesson, sticking together in hard times. So when hard times come around, sometimes people fall away. But as for the family, I think the family should draw closer in hard times. They should be a shoulder for each other to lean on. And I think Ruth understood that well. I think she's most known for her passionate speech that she gives in Ruth 1 verse 16 going down. And I'll just read it for you. But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you. or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. I'm telling you, I felt that. Those are some passionate, heartfelt words coming from Ruth, seeing that she and Naomi shared no real blood relation, and that the link that tied them together, which was Naomi's son, Mahlon, he was dead, and so there was no longer really a relationship there. It was severed. But Ruth wasn't looking at it like that. She was thinking of Naomi as her own mother. She probably remembered the times that Naomi was there for her, how she cared for her. And I'm thinking that Naomi must have been a very loving mother-in-law in order for Ruth to look at her like that and treat her the way that she did. To say that even if she died, she would die too, and where she'd be buried with her. That's how far Ruth was willing to go for Naomi, and it says a lot. And it teaches us that we as a family, we should be able to lean on each other. Not only that, we should go above and beyond for each other as a family. We should be sticking our necks out for each other. That's the ideal version of what a family should be like and how we should treat each other because of the sense of love that is shared between us. And let me just read here what I have written. So Naomi's speech shows that these are very, very strong words. These are words of total commitment and sacrifice. Real families stick together when things get hard. When times are tough is when we need family the most. Not only to get us out of a jam, but to love and support us at our lowest. In truth, Ruth had no reason to stay with Naomi. She could have done what Orpah did. Naomi encouraged her to do what Orpah did in any case, and that she would go and find prospects. But Ruth doesn't take the easy way out. She takes the hard path of traveling with Naomi to an unknown place with unknown people who would see her as a foreigner and look down on her because of her incestuous lineage. If you know anything about Moab, and how the people of Moab came about, it was with earlier in Genesis when Lot's daughter caused him to be drunk so that he slept with her unwillingly. A lot of crazy thing going on there. So they were definitely looked down on as being like a dirty race of people. She's from an incestuous lineage. That's nothing really to be proud of. And so they would probably treat her as such. But she chooses to follow Naomi, who is old and who had loved her as her own. And so she wanted to take care of Naomi. And that concludes the first lesson about sticking together. And basically, just to recap, families should stick together in a nutshell. The next lesson is about gratitude, respect, and being filial. So filial, if you don't know what that means, is basically when you show the correct response as a son or daughter to your parent. It's when you treat them the way that they should be treated and you show that kind of affection that they deserve. Okay, gratitude, respect, and being filial. It was Ruth's gratitude and love towards Naomi that led her to follow her to her homeland, and God blesses her for her obedience, her willingness, and her sincerity. That's something I really like about Ruth, how sincere she was. Because really, what was she getting out of this? Not much, really, other than being there by Naomi's side, helping her, caring for her as her own mother. It seemed to me totally unselfish, and it didn't seem like there was any ulterior motive or anything driving that relationship. It was just pure unadulterated love, which is what I can respect. And she ends up marrying Boaz. That's Ruth. She ends up marrying Boaz, who was a near kinsman of Elimelech. So now in ancient Jewish law, if a man dies and leaves his widow, then the closest kinsman would marry her to carry on the man's legacy. So in this case, there was a closer kinsman than Boaz, but some circumstances caused him not to be able to marry Ruth, so Ruth was able to marry Boaz instead. And while Naomi is too old, Ruth, who has married Mahlon, who has also shared kinship with Boaz, was able to marry him. Through listening and respecting Naomi's advice as an elder and acting as a filial daughter, she was able to win Boaz over with her grace and humble attitude. So this story, it almost seems like, okay, Ruth doesn't really have much agency and all of that. But you know what? The fact is that she's able to use her resources, and in the times that she was living in, she was playing everything really smart. She was doing things that would afford her the life that she needed to live. And so, by listening to Naomi, who is an older, wiser woman, she was able to figure out how she could win over Boaz, how she could basically get his affection so that he would be willing to marry her and so that they would be saved. Because really, if they couldn't find somebody who would take care of them, be, the head of their family, who knows what would have happened to them. So this was really a life or death situation for both of them. And so she secures a marriage with him and has a son named Obed. So if you know a little about the biblical genealogy, you know that Obed begat Jesse, and then Jesse begat King David. And we all know about King David and the special legacy that he brought and the kings following him. So Ruth, because of her obedience and her willingness to stick with Naomi and follow her, she became the great grandmother to a lineage of kings. And to me, that's a big plus. And so she was also able to start a family of her own, because remember, she didn't have a child before, and now with Boaz she was able to have a child. And she still considered Naomi her mother-in-law. She didn't forget her, she didn't leave her. She ensured that Naomi was there with them in the household. And Boaz, of course, he was a responsible man. He made sure that Naomi was a part of his household. And so this story ends with God honoring Ruth because of her sacrificial attitude, her love towards Naomi, showing herself as a filial daughter. And he also restores everything to Naomi, who had lost it all, her husband, her children, her legacy. And so all of that was restored to Naomi just because of a simple act of love from Ruth. That is what we should exemplify as people who also have families. So that wraps up story number 1. I hope that you learned something from this. I enjoy this story because reading it, I realized that there is power in simplicity. Because sometimes you want big fantastical stories that, and sometimes the women in the Bible are looked down on because maybe they're not fighting battles or brandishing swords or something like that. But this is a nice, simple, wholesome story of what Ruth was able to do with her resources in the time that she was living in, and how it worked for her, and how it can work for us when we treat our families with love, respect, and gratitude. Gratitude is such an important element. Sometimes I know that I can be very ungrateful. I'm not going to hide. But at the same time, I still think it's always necessary to give thanks, and it's always necessary to say thank you to parents and to people who stick their necks out for us, for people who try their best for us. And sometimes we feel underappreciated, or we feel sidelined when people forget to say the simple things like that. So remember to tell mom, to tell dad thank you today, to tell aunt, to tell your guardian, whomever it is who you find is always in your corner, to tell that person thank you for what you've always been doing for me. And that concludes the first lesson on familial relationships. Great. Am I right? Yep. Okay. This story, whoa. I've always heard the story of Joseph but I've never really heard like the focus on like the brothers and father and the relationship. And there was a really interesting dynamic going on there. Normally, when you hear the story of Joseph, it's about how he was able to overcome trials and that God blessed him in a foreign land, and that despite the enemy working, God was working more in his life and he thrived. Let me just read what I have here. So Jacob, Joseph, and his brothers. This familiar relationship was much more tumultuous than the last, for sure. This story made me laugh. Seriously, this story made me laugh. It made me cry at times because it got pretty emotional towards the end. You might say, "Oh, you cry over that?" Like, serious anything? No, I'm serious. Like, it got to a point where I'm like, I'm deeply invested in the story. And it taught me a lot about family as well as how God's purpose prevails above all, which is the primary theme. All right. So the story of Joseph is often recited in church as a story of God blessing and protecting his children, no matter where they are or what circumstance they find themselves, so long as they are serving him faithfully. But my reading of this story, Genesis, was different this time around because of the lens I was looking through. I was focused on the family and the relationship or ties between Jacob and his sons. So just a little background, maybe not a little background, maybe a lot, a lot of background. Jacob is often known as the trickster or deceiver. His name literally means supplanter. So the name that his parents gave him, Jacob, it means supplanter. So he's meant to uproot, he's meant to like cause trouble based on the name he was given. Later down we see where God changes his name to Israel. And one second. Through his wit, his mother's scheming, and God's ultimate will for his life, he won his father's birthright even though he was younger than his twin brother Esau. They struggled because of this, but God eventually allowed Esau to be at peace with his brother. In that time, when polygamy was still a thing, Jacob married his cousin. That was a regular thing as well. And I think we know this. I think we've heard a lot of history, not just Bible characters, just history in general, where people marry their cousins. And Jacob married his cousins Leah and Rachel. He initially planned to marry Rachel, who he loved. He actually loved her, like he fell in love with her on sight, but was tricked and ended up marrying Leah, which is the oldest sister. And the Bible described her as cross-eyed. That means she had a funny eye and she wasn't the best looking gal per se, but she was the elder, and so by right she should be married first. And so Laban allowed him to marry her and not Rachel. And but God is fair. God is fair because Rachel was not able to give birth to children even though she was the favored wife. It was Leah who was the one who was fertile, and she took pride in that because she was able to have four children before Rachel could even have one. And then her maidservant or handmaid, Zilpah, she had two, and then Bilhah, which is Rachel's handmaid, had two, and Rachel finally had two before she died. Yeah, she died when she was having Benjamin, which was her last son. And that is the history for Joseph, really. Um, because I mean Jacob, because Rachel was his favorite wife. Her two sons that she had were actually Joseph and Benjamin. So it was like Joseph was this long-awaited son that he couldn't wait for Rachel to have. And then when she finally had him, he was just so overjoyed. And the Bible actually says that Jacob loved Joseph more than his other sons, and he was the long-awaited child, and he also had the most godly character. So he was upright, and all of these things, all of these good values is what his father recognized in him. And he was the favorite, and trust me, that set up a world of problems. And so that brings us to lesson number 1 in what not to do: loving other children more. So I couldn't really understand why Jacob would go out of his way to show a particular favoritism to Joseph, because he had in total 12 sons, and to just, I don't know, like kind of set them against each other with that kind of lack of care in how he's handling the situation, to me, that was not a very smart move, just in my opinion. It is almost impossible for parents to not have a favorite child, which is true, but this is wrong. At least it's wrong to let the child be aware that he or she is the favorite child and let the other children be aware that they are not. But Jacob had no such qualms. He gave Joseph a fabulous cloak of many colors, like a beautiful cloak that he could wear, that he could show off. And I'm like, he never gave that to any of the other sons. And trust me, Joseph loved that thing. He never left the house without it. He could be seen wearing it like all the time. And it was unintentional on his part. Like he didn't mean to flaunt it, but he was just always wearing it. And of course, this sparked jealousy, and Joseph's brothers hated him. Joseph's brothers hated him. And I mean, of all the children, it seems weird that it would just be Joseph that had this cloak, because I mean, Reuben was the firstborn, Benjamin is the so-called wash belly, and Judah is my personal favorite, just so you know what is special about Joseph. And that is what they were saying amongst themselves, really. That's what they were thinking was so special about Joseph. And it doesn't seem that Benjamin was often tied up with the other brothers because he was young, so he wouldn't be around them as much. He'd probably be inside. He wouldn't be out in the fields working like they did. All right. And so that is the idea. Not allowing your children to know that you have a favorite child, and that they're gonna feel isolated. They're gonna feel like, okay, you don't love me as much, so why should I listen to you? Often they become rebellious. Often they feel depressed, sad, angry. They lash out because of something like that, and then they hate on the other sibling, and then they find themselves spiraling. So this is something I think parents should pay special attention to, making sure that the child or all their children feel loved. Lesson 2, and we're back, yeah. Lesson 2, sibling rivalry and how that stinks. Because I am kind of stretching myself here, because I am my only child. I'm just gonna come out and say it for all who didn't know. I have no siblings. What is she talking about? She doesn't have any siblings. But I'm able to observe at the very least. So I know people who do have siblings, and I see how they interact. And so here goes it. Joseph really was just being himself. But I found him so annoying, like sometimes he really annoyed me. He's just a Bible character. I don't know why he was so annoying to me. Anyway, in Genesis, he's mentioned to be about 17 years old at the time, but he doesn't seem to do any work. Like, he's always looking for his brothers, trying to find his brothers. And where are his brothers? Out in the field working. So that implies to me that he's never out in the field working, or he would know where they were. And and he had a bad habit that cemented the already festering feelings in his brothers. God gave him dreams of him ruling over his brothers, or to at least anyone with half a brain. When you listen to what he was saying, that's the interpretation that you will come up with, which was true. So he'd say things like, "Oh, I had this dream, and I am a sheep, and then the other sheaves are bowing down to me," or "I'm a star, and the other stars are bowing down to me." And I was like, but who asked though? Nobody. Why are you telling me this? And his brothers felt the same. They're like, oh, so you're trying to say that you're going to rule over us. Let me read a verse for you specifically from Genesis 37, verse 8. Shalt thou indeed reign over us? or shalt thou have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. So they already disliked him because it was clear that his father preferred him over them. And then he had an attitude that they likened to arrogance. So that was extremely impressive. There was definitely friction there between these brothers. And it is important for us to learn when and what to say. That is the lesson. When and what to say. So we're siblings, or if you have siblings, I know sometimes siblings really tussle and they get into arguments that can be pretty bad and they say things that they don't mean. And sometimes I feel like if they do feel like they're the favorite child, they try to leverage that. And then that sparks all sort of conflict between them. So it's important to be careful and to know how to walk that line. So to me, Joseph wasn't being very wise. I don't think he was completely oblivious to it. Maybe he just wanted to be around them. You know, he's young, that kind of younger, annoying brother. And a lot of people say that their younger brother is so annoying, like that kind of idea. He just wanted to be around them and talk because he loved to talk. And maybe that was just his thing, but he should have exercised a level of wisdom to know that I can't be walking around saying this, even if it is true. Anyway, Joseph is just innocently sharing his dreams with his brothers, and but he's unconsciously stoking a fire, and they think that he believes that he's better than them, and nobody would like that. And so, as siblings, or people who do have siblings, it's important to get along. It's important to love your sibling, know that they're in your life for a reason and that they're not just passers-by. They're somebody that you can really have a lasting relationship with and who you can lean on in times of need. You're gonna be siblings forever. You're gonna need each other, especially when parents aren't around anymore. That's when you need each other even more. So I think that love is important to have between siblings. Okay, and now we're on lesson number 3. Not controlling anger and making rash decisions. So it might be that this story seems extensive. It is. It's kind of very long. It goes on for a couple of chapters, but it's important that all the elements are mentioned so that you're able to follow why and what is happening. So, not controlling anger and making rash decisions is where we are. So, the dreams that Joseph always had, this was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. And one day, when his brothers saw Joseph walking up to them, and I feel like you could like hear the spite in their voice when you read the words in the Bible. And they said, Behold, the dreamer cometh. Come now therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit, and we will say some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. That sounds like pure hate, undiluted, just pure hate. And this was the level where it was at. This is how they felt about Joseph. Joseph innocently thinking that, oh, they're just my big brothers, and I'm so low, blah, blah, going about my merry way. And here they were thinking like to literally kill him. And Reuben, who is the oldest, I guess he showed some sense and some kind of quality of, yeah, I'm more mature than that, probably more mature than them. He said, okay, let's just throw him into the pit. Let's not kill our brother. Maybe let's just not do that. And they were like, okay, yeah, that sounds okay. And what Reuben was actually planning to do was to just come back and to save Joseph, like pick him up out of the pit. And so they threw him into the pit, but Reuben went to do something somewhere. I don't know. He wasn't paying attention. And it says in Genesis 37, verse 23 to 25, and it came to pass when Joseph was come unto his brethren that they stripped Joseph out of his coat of many colors that was on him, and they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, and there was no water in it, and they sat down to eat bread. Honestly, these people are scaring me. because the first thing they went for was the coat because of what the coat symbolized or what it signified. It signified Jacob's love of Joseph, showing that he was better than them in some way, and so they hated that. So they tore it to pieces first, and then they threw him into the pit, and then they just sat down casually, like they just didn't do a evil and wicked thing to their own brother. They were just eating bread, like, oh, whatever. And that's kind of scary, but you can understand at the same time where these feelings are coming from, and this is why it's important to be careful. Maybe we won't take it to this level of extreme where we're actually trying to murder each other, but a lot of people walk away with hurt feelings, and a lot of people carry around resentment because of their parents, how their parents treated them, how they felt that their brother or sister was treated in comparison to them, and all of these things. They carry around a lot of baggage concerning that, and they have a lot of anger, and so it comes out in different ways. They lash out, they get angry, they say things that they don't really mean, but it's coming from a very deep and dark place. Maybe not on the level of Joseph Brothers, but definitely somewhere in the area. But Judah, he suddenly changes the plan like midway. He sees some Midianite and he's like, hey, listen up, maybe we should just sell him. Let's just sell him so we can get some money off of him instead of kill him and have it do nothing for us. And so they actually sold Joseph, and this was such an awful thing because they sold him into slavery. He was going to be taken by the Midianites to be a slave in Egypt, and that is a terrible, terrible level of cruelty. Like, that is just unimaginable because to be free your whole life and then having been sold into slavery, you can just imagine what that meant for Joseph. And when Reuben actually came back, he tore his clothes because he saw that Joseph was gone. He messed up. He went away and they sold him, and then they went ahead with their plan and they just took the coat that was on him and they dip it in goat's blood, and they were like, showed it to the father and be like, hey, Joseph died. An animal ripped him apart. And that was it. Jacob cried. Like, he cried, and I felt it. I was like, this is so evil. Like, why would you do this to your own parents, your own brother? Even if you're so hurt, like, this just feels like a next level. But God had a plan. God had a plan. And I really do blame Jacob a lot. Not Joseph, Jacob, because he's the parent and felt like he didn't handle the situation in the best way, which is why it lets all of this kind of festering feelings. But at the same time, this is a new level of wickedness and shouldn't be condoned at all. And so that's it. So my few words on controlling anger and making rash decisions. I am not very good at controlling anger. Even as I'm speaking to you right now, I'm easily angered. I don't like to feel like I'm being shut down. I don't like to feel like I'm being overridden. I don't like people telling me things that I don't think are true, and I'm going to lash out. That is something I need to work on, definitely. And then in the heat of the moment, that's when I choose the answer, which is wrong. That's just wrong because the Bible says only a fool answers when he's angry, only a fool does things when he's angry. The Bible says don't let the sun go down on your wrath. You shouldn't be angry. If you don't know what to say in the moment, be quiet, be silent. Instead of saying something that is just gonna be so damaging. Sorry about that. So damaging to the other person. Alright guys, we're on the last lesson, a good lesson to learn. And the lesson that we should draw from this is forgive me for what I have done. So this last part of the story, to me, it's very transformative. It's very important, and I'll just read to you what I have here. And remember when I mentioned that Joseph had a godly character? Well, that served him well because when he was sold to Egypt, in Egypt, because he was humble and he looked to God in his trying circumstance, and he did what was right in the sight of God, that God lifted him up. He went from the pit to Potiphar's house to prison to Pharaoh's right hand man. He only didn't sit on the throne of Egypt. Otherwise, he held all the power. Like he held all the power in the land. That's the level that Joseph attained because of God blessing him in his life. But he was still the same old Joseph in a sense. He hadn't forgotten what had happened to him. He didn't forget his family, and that's why he was so moved when he saw his brothers. A background here. Because God had a plan, he sent Joseph to Egypt deliberately, even though it might have seemed like, oh, this is just his brothers doing their wickedness. It wasn't God's plan. And so while in Egypt, he still got the dreams, and so he was able to interpret Pharaoh's dream. And Pharaoh had a dream about 7 cows and 7 stalks, and was able to tell him that there'd be 7 years of plenty, and then after that there'd be 7 years of extreme famine, that it would be like there was no plenty before it. And so basically with that information they were able to like store up food and get things in order, and they like stored up a lot of food during the plentiful years. And then 7 years of famine came, not only in Egypt but in the whole world, so that people from all over the world had to come to Egypt to buy food. That's how severe the famine was. And of course, people would include his brothers. And so when Joseph saw them, like he cried, he could not believe, like his eyes, like these were his brothers. And they couldn't recognize him though, because of course they would have thought he was dead. Maybe in that time they had time to think, to really realize the evil that they had done, like to think and be like, we regret this so much, like how could we have done that to our brother? And we see some of that later down. But basically, Joseph, like, I don't know, he planned on hustling them. He gave them like a really hard time. This part of the story is like really convoluted because he did a lot of things to just get under their skin. And so when they came, he was hassling them, telling them that they couldn't buy food here, that they were spies. Oh, you're spies, you come to spy out the land, blah, blah, blah. They're like, no, we just come to buy food. And he started asking them all sorts of questions like, is this all of you? And they're like, no, we have a younger brother. And then he's like, where is your father? And he's like, our father's at home. And they're like, he's asking these questions. We, the reader, will know why he's asking, because he wants to see if Benjamin is okay and if his father is still alive. And so he's basically hustling them, and then he tells them that they can never come back there unless they bring the younger brother with him. So they go home a little weirded out and a bit distressed, but they survive for the few months with the food that they have, and then they have to go back. And basically Jacob is like, no, you cannot take Benjamin. Like Benjamin is the only child left of Rachel in his mind. And so he wouldn't send Benjamin basically to die, because he didn't know what would happen if Benjamin went with them. But Judah is the one that has to stand up and be like, okay, if we don't care about Benjamin, then basically let all the shame fall on me, let all the blame fall on me. I will take it, because they knew that they couldn't be able to buy food or go back, because the man was serious, man being Joseph. And so they came back with Benjamin in tow, and Joseph acted all benevolent and he carried them to the palace, and then he was like having a feast for them. And like while there, because he was in the position that he was in, they all bowed to him. And I remember the dreams that he always had, like, oh, they would bow to me one day and all of that. So it actually came true, even though the entire thing felt like it went off the rails. This was a part of God's plan. And so he basically fed them and they were having a good time and all of that. And then he pulls one more stunt. As they're leaving, he puts a silver cup in Benjamin's bag to say that Benjamin stole from them. So when they've left and they've gone a good while, then they pursue them and then they catch them, and he's like, you stole from me and whatever, whatever. And I don't know why they're so presumptuous and they're just so quick to say things and vow to things, because Judah was like, let whoever has a silver cup among us, let him be taken. And when it's revealed that it's Benjamin that they have to bring back home, they're like losing their minds. They're like, why did I say that? And then they basically take him back to Egypt, and then Joseph brings them into this room, and then he sends everybody out, and like you can probably like imagine the people like listening at the door, like I wonder what's going on in there, and then the jig is just up. He just completely loses it, and he just breaks down and starts crying. The Bible said that he cried so loud that everybody in the house heard him. I'll just read it to you. It's in Genesis 45, verse 2 to 3. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph, doth my father live? And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled at his presence. And Joseph said unto his brethren, Come near to me, I pray you. And they came near, and he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me your brother. For God sent me before you to preserve life. And I just read that and I'm like, whoa. Like Joseph at this point, he had so many reasons to be so angry, so mad, but he just flipped the script to me. He just looked at the situation like even though he came from these trying circumstances and he found himself at trouble at times, look at where God brought him in the situation where he's second to Pharaoh in all the land. He has control over everything. And all of this was done for a purpose because God knew that a famine would come on the earth and that people would need food, and that by sending Joseph there, like people could live because they'd be able to have food. And Joseph is looking at it through that lens, through that perspective, instead of one of bitterness, of anger, of resentment, that you would say that he had a right to have based on all that happened. But at the same time, he's like forgiving him, and I'm like, I'm kind of nervous because I'm like, he's kind of jumping the gun. Like, are they really sorry? Are they sorry about what they did? Like, should he be saying that I forgive you all of these? He should definitely be saying that from my Christian perspective, regardless of what they feel. But it would be nice to know how they are feeling in this moment. And basically, a verse says this: Moreover, he kissed all his brethren, verse 15 of the same chapter. Moreover, he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them, and after that his brethren talked with him. And I can just imagine the conversation, like so many I'm sorry, so many, I shouldn't have done this. How have you been? Like so many words, and probably words fail them at times to be able to say. Because what do you say? What do you say so that the relationship had gotten so bad that it was at this point? What can you say really? And they were obviously sorry in their own way. Sorry what they had done to him, sorry of what had happened, but Joseph was just so glad to be with his family again. And I mean, they sold him, they thought he was really dead, and God did all of that so that they could survive the famine, which is amazing. And life surely is something because sometimes we feel we come to the end of ourselves, and sometimes things happen to us in life where we're just so beat down, we can't see how we can possibly rise again. Like, how does life go on from this? A lot of times, tragedy strikes, and we just cannot pick up ourselves. But this is to show that even at a lowest or your lowest point where everything is dark, God is there. If you would reach out to Him, God is there. Of course, they hurried and brought Jacob, who couldn't believe at first. I mean, he thought he was dead. They told him that he was dead, all of these, but he just cried. And this is the part that touched me the most because I'm just thinking like your own parent and they thought you were dead, and then you come back and then they're just like in a state. He wasn't even believing them, and then he saw the caravan and everything that Joseph had laden with goods and so to come and meet them. And they moved from where they were living to Egypt. So that was like 70 people in total in the family alone moved to Egypt. And chapter 46, verse 24, I believe, or somewhere there above. And Joseph made ready his chariot, went up to meet Israel, that's Jacob, his father, to Goshen, and presented himself unto him. And he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. I mean, like words fail me at that point because that is just a complete story of restoration, a story coming full circle. So they hated each other, as in the brothers hated each other, and really the only thing that could be done in that situation, or some people will think I'll be done, there is nothing you can say to me. I don't ever want to see you again. Like this relationship is completely destroyed. But Joseph took a completely different route. He was just like, forgive me. I forgive you. I forgive you. And they were like so willing to say I'm sorry, and they accepted that forgiveness. And really, I believe that's a great ending because it shows that at the even when we come to the end ourselves, we do things that we don't really mean. We should always be in a mood or in a readiness to forgive, especially towards family. If we don't, then we won't speak, and then we won't see each other, and then there'll be unsaid words and kept in feelings that we're keeping inside, things that we will regret. And so I think it's always best as family, amongst family, that we find it in our heart to forgive some of these things. Familial bonds are just so strong. We often hear the phrase blood is thicker than water, and it's somewhat true. It's just so strong. There's a reason why you're placed in a family. You can't just easily let go of a family member. That's never an easy thing to do. Even if in your mind they're like the worst person on earth, still it's so hard to sever a relationship. It's much better to rebuild if possible, because really some people, they're just irredeemable. You can't really work with, you can't do anything with them. You persist, but they're the same, and that's not you. Sometimes it's better for that relationship to dissolve, even though they are family, but that's rarely the case. I would recommend. Okay, guys, final words, and I'll just read exactly what I wrote here. A lot of families are much more like Joseph and his brothers than, say, Naomi and Ruth. It's more complicated. There is strife, bitterness, envy, and anger. There's also love, forgiveness, and compassion. A family is not weak because imperfect people are given to these types of feelings and emotions. It's only weak when we can't move past it together, when we dwell, when we can't heal from our pain and our hurt, when we can't admit our wrongs and seek reconciliation. Joseph was governor in Egypt with everything at his fingertips and God on his side, but he still needed community. He still needed his family. He saw that even though his brothers acted out of spite and envy, God used it for good, and all he wanted was for them to be together again. And so he forgave them. They were shamed, shocked, afraid. They were at their brother's mercy, really. But Joseph was still Joseph, so all he did was hug them and cry because he didn't have any reason to hate them in his mind. And they being confronted with that level of forgiveness, found themselves letting go, and they stopped resenting him. They were finally happy. They were content. We need each other. No matter how awful we are to each other sometimes, no one can do without a family. That's why we that's why we cling. That's why we cling to each other. Like Ruth and Naomi, like Joseph did his brothers. We need each other. And that wraps up Stargate Love. Guys, this was very, very long. It's almost an hour talking. I did not expect this to be long. I can't imagine writing this. I guess it would be shorter, but I wouldn't be able to share everything that I had to say. I'm really liking this series so far because it's allowing me to get into the word, to actually read it, and it's allowing me to see a different perspective because I've always heard the story of Joseph, but I've never really focused on the family dynamic, nor have I really heard the story of Ruth. So being able to go into the Bible and see all that it has to offer in terms of wisdom and knowledge is such a great experience. And I hope this touched you guys, and I hope that you find time to listen to it, even if it's a bit by bit since it's so long. But I pray that you have a great evening or day or whatever time it is. And thank you. Until next time. Bye bye.